Welcome to the Courting Happiness podcast. This is a space where self-care becomes part of your day. A space where you learn evidence-based strategies to help your life, share it with those you love, and cultivate well-being at work. I'm your host, Dr. Courtney Alston. I'm a former news director, television reporter turned happiness scholar, TEDx speaker, and transformational trainer. I also understand hardships. While working my dream job in television, I lived a nightmare suddenly becoming a young widow after 86 days of marriage. I became committed to learning more about resilience, healing, and happiness. This is how I discovered my area of research, which is positive psychology. Now I'm living my calling of training individuals and organizations on happiness. And my new chapter begins with being happily engaged. The Courting and Courting Happiness is about a true courtship. I like to say commitment with happiness. The K in courting stands for the vulnerability of sharing my story, inspirational interviews with phenomenal people, the infusion of positive psychology, and so much more. You'll learn how to commit to your well-being one episode at a time. I hope you subscribe and share. So, are you ready? Let's get started. Welcome to episode 61. I'm Dr. Courtney Alston. I am so happy that you're here. Thank you so much for listening. This is our Thanksgiving episode. Happy Thanksgiving. I hope you're enjoying your Thanksgiving with your family and friends. I am truly thankful this holiday for my family and friends and my fiance, Ken, who I talk about pretty often on the podcast. And I'm so grateful. I am truly grateful for you. I'm grateful for you listening to this podcast. I'm grateful for every post I see. I'm grateful for every email that comes in terms of the podcast. And I'm so grateful to hearing how the podcast has really helped you. I'm also so grateful to seeing all of our community come together, especially in our Facebook group. So hint, hint, if you're if you're not a part of it yet, please join us. Again, it's the Courting Happiness podcast Facebook group. And I'm so happy to see listeners joining the group and sharing different posts and their positive experiences and how the podcast has also served them. So for those of you who are new, welcome. I'm so happy and grateful that you're here. And I like to ask a couple of questions. So I want you to think about some of the questions I'm about to ask. So here's one. Do you often think about work a lot, especially during the holidays? Maybe it's a challenging time or you've been ruminating about something on the job. You might be thinking about work right now, right? Am I right? Are you? Well, what if you're a manager and you're looking to implement workplace well-being at your company? Maybe you're looking to strengthen the strategy that you have, or maybe you're just looking to start. Maybe you haven't had a chance to figure out what that looks like yet. Well, we have an expert that will help you get a better pulse at work. Dr. Ashley Bryant joins the podcast today. This psychotherapist shares her 5-part framework of P.U.L.S.E. She creates a really transformative experience for leaders seeking to make an impact in workplace wellness. Dr. Ashley is phenomenal. So get ready to find out how the P.U.L.S.E approach can help you focus on your well-being at work. Let's dive in. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Ashley Bryant. I am so super excited about this conversation. Welcome to the Courting Happiness podcast.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
It's good to be able to see you. And I say that because I'm talking to Dr. Ashley via Zoom. And so we love to use his platform so I can be able to have really a great visual view of our conversation. And then on top of the fact that we leverage it as relates to the audio for the podcast. But it's wonderful to be able to see Dr. Ashley. I complimented her on her studio, by the way, her office area, which I'm just like amazed by. Great colors back there. But I'm super excited to be able to talk about really the brilliance of your work. And so one of the things I really value on top of so many things that you're working on, Dr. Ashley, is really the value and the importance of workplace well-being. And that's one of the things you and I have in common in terms of our work in that area. Why is workplace well-being so important?
Yeah. I mean, workplace well-being is so important because well-being is important, right? And when we think about the pandemic has hit people hard on so many different levels, physically, mentally, and financially. And so people don't stop being people when they go to work. And we spend most of our time at work. And so that's why it's so important for us to really focus on workplace well-being, and it's important for organizations to focus on the well being of their employees as well. Because, like I said, we just don't stop being people when we go to work.
Absolutely. I love that you shared that because it's really important to recognize that, right? That we don't stop being people. It's really the value of understanding that we're human, right? And with being a
Absolutely.
yeah, being a human being, things happen, life can happen, but sometimes there may be negativity or negative challenges that can happen in our lives. And so what I love so much is that you're talking about the value of that and then the importance of giving us this permission to be human, which is so super important. It's interesting you talked about the pandemic. I feel like the pandemic has magnified everything. How has the pandemic, you talked about the different challenges in terms of financial and also as relates to health as in terms of the pandemic. How do you feel the pandemic has both hurt but helped us?
Yeah. If we just were to use one area, right? Anxiety. And so the pandemic has really increased anxiety for individuals, especially with the unknown. When we were in that period of time where a lot of individuals were uncertain if they were going to be able to keep their jobs. Some people did, some people didn't. And then we were in another period of uncertainty as to whether organizations were going to shift to everyone returning back to a brick and mortar office, or whether or not they were going to adopt a hybrid model where people were going to continue to work at home. But for and then for another group of people, the pandemic helped their anxiety, right? To where they have been dealing with social anxiety at work. And so when they were able to transition to working at home, they kind of had a little bit of reprieve. Also, if they were dealing with a boss that was just probably not equipped to be a good boss, then they had a bit of reprieve in that regard as well, working from home. And so anxiety has just been like the big thing that people have been dealing with in regards to the pandemic, because anxiety really deals with the unknown. And there were so many unknowns related to this novel virus.
It's so true. So many unknowns, and the unknowns can, of course, what you mentioned in terms of uh, elevating levels of our anxiety, right? And
Yeah.
then also trying to sort out, because being creatures of habit, that, it certainly breaks routine, right? I mean,
Yes.
I remember the day that I was on campus. And my chair at the time says, we're telling us that we're going to go home and that we need to now work remotely. And at the very beginning, that was something that was like, we're not sure what that's going to look like, but we were all kind of playing it by ear, but then thinking about that this might just last for that semester. And
Mhm.
then the pandemic just started to grow and to elevate, and lockdown, which we might, some of us might have thought, oh, well, lockdown's probably not going to be very long. And then one day I said, I haven't been back in my office on campus in 18 months. And
Yeah.
and and so I was like, wow, I haven't seen that space in 18 months. And so it's also very surreal to be able to, have some of these experiences. What do you advise for individuals who are coping with, that difference in terms of their environment as it relates to work and home?
Absolutely. I think what we're going to have to do now is we're going to have to develop a new routine. What helped us in when we were working in our brick and mortar offices is we were used to a routine, right? And so now we're just going to have to shift a little bit and develop a routine while we're working from home. One of the one of the things that I tell my individuals who are working from home is put pants on every single day. Even though
What? You want us to put on pants, Dr. Ashley? Look.
put on pants. One, you feel good when you get ready for the day. Two, it's going to really help you monitor those COVID pounds because what happens is those COVID pounds will sneak up because we are in yoga pants and sweats every day.
Yes. That is so true. Just put on your pants, right? In terms of,
Yes.
and because you're right, it creates it kind of holds us accountable, right?
Right.
It gives us this value in terms of a level of routine, some of the things that we might have missed. And it's interesting because Gretchen Rubin talks about this in the Happiness Project in regards to making your bed every day and how that can increase, your levels as it relates to happiness. And so I love that in terms of Dr. Ashley's telling us to put our pants on, because, I love that as it relates to giving us a routine and kind of like making sure we're really structuring as much as we can levels of our day. So I love that in terms of your advice. And so you also have a wonderful approach called Pulse. Tell us about how the Pulse approach can help workplaces as it relates to well-being.
Yeah. So the PULSE approach. So PULSE is an acronym. It stands for praise, understand, listen, self-regulate, and empathize. So a lot of the work that I do with organizations is really centered around emotional intelligence. So whether we're talking about leadership development or we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, what we're really talking about is emotional intelligence, how we respond when we are faced with stress. And so, what the Pulse framework does is it breaks down emotional intelligence in a way in which organizations can check their cadence or check their pulse within the organization so they can see how well are we doing with offering authentic praise? How well are we understanding ourselves and the people around us? How well do we listen? Self-regulate and empathize. So that's how I came up with the Pulse framework as just really a simplistic way to equip organizations with the tools to really increase their EQ.
I love that, increasing their EQ and giving them really the strategies that they need to really be able to go about implementing, your approach. So, what would you tell an organization who is looking at incorporating Pulse and your approach in the workplace? How would they go about including that, right? In terms of their day-to-day and really maybe for some organizations shifting the culture of their workplace.
Absolutely. It definitely is going to take a culture shift. And that's something that we, when we work with organizations and we're teaching the Pulse framework, we do go beyond just teaching the framework because we know that we have a coaching program as well, because we know when you work with a coach, you tend to be a little bit more accountable, whether you're working with a fitness coach or whether you're working with an executive coach. So it's not one of those things that we learn. It's like, okay, yeah, that class was good, but then we never revisit it again. And so we really like to combine teaching the framework with coaching as well. But we really encourage a starting point is to be reflective and to be honest. So start by asking yourself those very questions of how well do we implement praise? What do we do to make sure that we're understanding not only ourselves, but others around us? How well do we listen? How well do we self-regulate? And how well do we empathize? And so a good starting point is just to start with the P. Start with praise and think about how can I begin on my day-to-day life offering authentic praise and showing gratitude to the people around me.
I love that in terms of offering authentic praise. And as you mentioned, in terms of gratitude, as it relates to, because we often may think about gratitude outside of work, right? But, I love the fact that you're talking about the importance of gratitude within the workplace and how that can serve the organization. It's interesting, when you talked about praise, yeah, I often think back on how important it is to have that level of acknowledgement, right, within an organizational structure. What can organizations do as it relates to praise in terms of being more inclusive to make sure that, because sometimes when it comes down to that acknowledgement, maybe a chosen few may be the ones that we're constantly hearing the cheers for. So what can an organization do in terms of making sure that they're creating a much more inclusive approach so the culture is not just one, but is really looking at many?
Yeah. So when we think about praise, how we praise individuals, it doesn't have to be so explicit, like, okay, Dr. Courtney, you did really well on this. Great job. Praise can also look like, you know what, Dr. Courtney, you've been working on this particular project, and I see that you do really well, and I want to recommend you for this leadership program. And so what that looks like is like, oh my gosh, this person really trusts me to be a part of this program. And so that may look different for different people within the organization. Trusting people to make decisions is another way to offer praise. Where if someone comes to you and they say, oh, I need to make a decision on XYZ, what do you think I should do? Whatever you decide, I trust that you're going to make I trust that your decision is going to be good, right? That's another way of offering praise aside from the traditional, thank you for doing this, or you did a really good job. So operating, and that's where praise and understand really comes, go hand in hand. When you understand the people that you work with, you're better equipped to offer praise that is authentic and speaks to their love language.
I love that because it speaks to the level of being seen,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because
Absolutely.
in the workplace, if you are, part of a team and you are doing this work, I love the way that your approach is all about making sure that that individual or individuals feel seen. Because when a supervisor approaches a member of their team and says not just simply, hey, I'd like you to do this, or this, as you mentioned in terms of that project, I love how you really shared in terms of really key communication skills right there, because of letting the individual know their value and really what they can contribute, opposed to, hey, we have something that needs to be done and I'm going to ask you to do it. Right. I think that's completely different than what you're sharing as relates to making sure that you're acknowledging, that person's really achievement and what they have really contributed to the organization. So I love that in terms of that, because and as you mentioned so eloquently, that it speaks to a level of being authentic. Can you also tell us a little bit more as it relates to what brought you to creating this approach? Because what I love so much about Pulse and the method, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about it, is that it really speaks to so many multifaceted levels as relates to the workplace. So how did you go about thinking about crafting this really transformative approach?
Yeah. So really, when we think about pulse on a physiological level, and also the way that I have conceptualized it within workplace wellness, is I wanted to see, how do we get at the heart of the organization? How do we begin to change the culture of organizations? Because with Pulse, I'm asking individuals to change your identity. I'm asking you to change the identity of the organization. I'm asking you to change the way you think, the way you go about doing things. And so that's really how it developed. I've spent many years working as a psychotherapist, working with employee assisted programs, or EAP. And so I would have so many individuals coming in talking about their experiences with work. And a lot of times I would think to myself, we can work on some tools here in therapy to help you cope. But what really needs to happen is there needs to be a shift within the organization. And not only to impact the life of this person that's sitting across from me, but to impact the entire organization. Because when we have organizations that lead with their heart, then you're going to have better employees, you're going to have better productivity, you're going to have happy employees, and it's going to be an increased bottom line for the organization as well. So it's a win-win for everyone.
It is a win-win. And I love what you shared, lead with your heart, right?
Yeah.
Because it speaks to so much in terms of the value of compassion at work and what that can look like. And also the importance of leading with a level of kindness, right? And grace throughout that approach. So I really value what you're sharing, and then also as it relates to what you've constructed in terms of this approach. Because one of the things I value in terms of positive psychology is to really the research in regards to the value of compassion in the workplace, the importance of looking at resilience in terms of work, and also the value of empathy at work. So you
Yes.
mentioned, a part of Pulse having this empathetic approach. I will say I kind of think of empathy. I tell my students it's like a superpower, because and I've often shared this, especially being a professor, and also as a trainer. I share this with executives and journalists, around the world, is that it's important to really be empathetic. But I think it's even more important now because of the pandemic and all the things that
Mhm.
we have been tackling. Tell us how empathy can serve on such a deep level within the organization, and what that looks like when a company is practicing or kind of leading, right? Leading with their
Yeah.
heart, and leading in terms of more empathetic leadership.
Yeah. Empathy is really going to be the driving force to really understanding one another and communicating effectively, where you're able to take a moment and put yourself in the shoes of that other person to understand their perspective, right? Because you can hear someone, you can hear what they're saying and not understand what perspective are they coming from. And that's what empathy allows you to do. It allows you to truly say, okay, I hear what you're saying, but let me try to understand it from your perspective so I can really dissect this. And then that's what communication really happens. Communication happens when the message sent is a message received and we are on one accord. And so when we begin to effectively communicate, it's going to help us get things done. And so empathy is really going to be the driving force of everything that we do within organizations.
I love that in terms of it being the driving force, and then also looking at what how powerful empathy can be in terms of leadership, and what that can mean as relates to really to strengthen. To me, it's a real strength-based approach when you think about
Right,
it, right?
right.
It's really talking in terms of a level of strength. And I love that you are giving organizations the tools to really operate that way.
Yeah.
So a part of Pulse, I guess I'm skipping around in terms of the whole Pulse
Absolutely.
dynamic, right? I go from P, and now all of a sudden I'm empathy, and now I'm going to go to you. I'm going to go to understanding, right? So I love the fact that understanding is a part of this, because if any time in our human existence, in terms of now, right, as we talked about,
Yeah.
the value of empathy during the pandemic, there has to be also this really importance as relates to understanding during the pandemic as well. What have you noticed as relates to companies that are doing a great job as it relates to showcasing levels of understanding?
Yeah. And, understanding that really goes hand in hand with employees' happiness, in that people feel seen when they feel as though they are understood. I think about, even, when I worked in corporate America, if my supervisor would come to me and say, you know what, Ashley, we had a consumer to say XYZ. And I'm like, okay, but do you really know me? Do you know that whether or not, like, this is even true? But if
Yeah.
you really knew me, your approach would be, okay, so this is what I said. I already know that this is not you, but tell me what was going on. And so when you are operating from a level of understanding where you truly get to know the people around you, you truly get to know yourself as well, then when you have to have those difficult conversations, even related to performance, right? You can leave those. It doesn't have to be where, even if you have to correct an employee who may be underperforming, it doesn't have to be where that employee left disgruntled or left upset, because you take the approach of, I understand you, and so it's going to change how I deliver this not so good information to you.
Absolutely. It's, as Dr. Ashley is speaking, I have a tendency, I'm saying yes, and I'm shaking my head a lot, because that is so true. Because if you go in with that level of understanding, your tone is different, your messaging is different, right? And so it also gives an opportunity of understanding maybe the why of why that person is underperforming. It's not, it might not be simple as, another dynamic in terms of scenario, just assuming, oh, that person's just not trying to do the job. No, maybe it's about looking at why this is going on. Maybe that this individual is tackling more as relates to more demands in regards to maybe in the office, but then also demands as relates to their health or their mental health, right? And really kind of serving as a champion or a partner as it relates to the really the stresses or the challenges. So I love that you're talking about seeing it, being more understanding, and really kind of maybe shifting what that conversation can possibly look like with compares to a lack of understanding. You also talk about, you mentioned listening, and active listening is a thing, and
Yes.
and it's I consider it an important thing, right? Because sometimes as human beings, some of us may actually listen just to give the response, right? But
Yes.
that doesn't
Yes.
mean you're actively listening. So give us some best practices on what active listening can be, because guys, it is a thing, and it's important.
Yes, yes. We do a lot of talking, right? But
Yes.
truly listening is an art, and it's a skill that can be learned and developed over time. So I'll tell you one thing that you can do to improve your active listening skills is to work on your reflecting back to individuals. And so what that looks like is, when you hear someone say something, you simply say, okay, what I hear you say is XYZ. Because what that does is it allows the other person an opportunity to say, yeah, that's what I said, or that is way off base. I did not say that. And so in that moment, it allows an opportunity for clarity. And that's what active listening does, is you are listening to understand, and it leaves you with a better understanding of what the other person said, and it leaves the other person feeling like that they were heard in the conversation.
I love that. It's so important in terms of having really being seen. In
Mhm.
terms of, I talk about that so often in terms of the value of being seen, and I love that you have provided tips that allows for really kind of a confirmation, opposed to, oh, the person said this and this is what I assume, opposed to really sharing that information with the individual, which allows, again, it lets you know that, okay, this person was listening, but it allows you to feel, wow, I can validate this. No, that's not what I meant. Or, yes, thank you so much. I love that, because that is really vital in regards to effectively communicating. right? Because that can easily go off the rails if we're making one assumption about someone. And then all of a sudden we're like, oh, okay, no, that is not what they meant. Let me make sure I reevaluate it. Because in some cases, we may be coming in with levels of our own bias, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
in terms of that, how do you go about helping people kind of check their bias at the door?
Mhm. And so, one of the things that you have to do first is acknowledge it. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and say this. We all have bias. And I say that and put it out in the air because a lot of times we look at bias as if it's a bad thing. And if we look at it as if it is a bad thing, then we become we're less likely to approach it because we don't want this label associated with us with anything bad. So we all have bias, but what we have to do is we have to work through that particular bias. And the first step is acknowledging the bias that I have.
So I love that in terms of that acknowledgement and really being able to see it and also be able to really begin to process it so we can say, okay, I have this, I have this bias, but I'm going to possibly put it here, right, on the
Yeah.
shelf, so to
Yeah.
speak, and begin that level of processing. So you mentioned in terms of the pulse approach, in terms of self-regulate.
Mhm.
What does that look like for an organization?
Yeah. So self-regulate, it has to do with self-awareness. So being aware of your emotions and regulating those emotions. We've all seen or we've even experienced or heard of individuals that wear their emotions on their sleeve. So if they're angry, they walk in the room, the whole room's angry. And so what self-regulation does, it allows you, one, being aware of your emotions and how you work through those emotions and express those emotions without projecting them onto other individuals. And so we can see this in in individuals who work in sales, right, where we're getting down to Q4, and it's the last week of the fiscal year, and they're like, well, okay, they're feeling anxious. We got to get these sales on the board. We got to get them on the board. And so what they do is they project that anxiety onto the team. Okay, what are you guys doing to get these sales? And it's like, okay, you are not motivating anyone with that type of mentality. And so, okay, understanding I'm feeling anxious, I may have to take a couple of deep breaths. I may have to reach out to a mental health provider to deal with my own anxiety. So I'm not projecting that onto my team and I can better serve them because that type of anxiety driven approach doesn't serve anyone.
It doesn't. It doesn't. And it also brings me to if you're the individual or individuals that are working with an individual like that, right? How do you go
Mm-hmm.
about almost protecting your own well-being when you may deal with a supervisor or possibly other coworkers that are operating in that capacity?
Yeah, you may have to take a couple of steps back. You may have to do some deep breathing on your own, which I really encourage it. But you may have to take a couple of steps back to really enforce some boundaries between that individual, whether it's your supervisor or another coworker, and being transparent about what you can and what you can't do. Where it's like, okay, I can do X, Y, and Z, but I may not be able to get this done, but offering a solution if you're able to do something else, and really looking to see, once all of the demands are put on you, prioritizing it. Does everything have to be done right now in the moment? And if it doesn't, focus on the things that have to be done right now and then schedule out the rest of the things, because everything, sometimes it feels like everything is a fire. Everything is not a fire. Focus on the real fires and work on putting those out. And then the things that aren't a fire, if it's going to be okay, if the world's not going to crash, if I get that done tomorrow, put it on the schedule for tomorrow.
I love that. Thank you so much for giving us permission to be firefighters in regards to in regards to all the fires that will, that we have, in terms of the workplace,
Yes.
and how to really kind of look at that differently, right? In terms of being able to evaluate it, saying, maybe they're not all fires. Maybe there's a couple of
Right.
flames going on here, right? But then I love how you allowed us to compartmentalize it, which really helps as it relates to the overwhelm, right? Because it
Mhm.
can be overwhelming when you're at work and you are, dealing with all of these different dynamics in terms of your workplace demands as it relates to all the other elements that we're coping with in terms of especially this pandemic. What is your advice for individuals to protect them from being emotionally exhausted, right? And protect them from burnout?
Yeah. So if we're talking about burnout as it relates to multiple tasks, then just simply asking your supervisor, what do you see is important that I get done today? And like we talk about planning everything else out. And then I tell people as well, if you are reaching the cuffs of burnout, where you're like, I don't know if this job is for me, I need to switch to something else, it's time for you to put in some PTO, take a vacation, take a mental health day. You need to take a break because your mental health has to be in the forefront. And that may mean that you taking some time off of work and then coming back and looking at it with fresh eyes.
Wow, I love that in terms of giving it fresh eyes, and also giving yourself the opportunity to take a break
Yeah.
and to possibly reevaluate and to, look at it with fresh eyes allows us to really make a decision that's not based in fear, but allows
Yes.
us to really make a decision that is like, okay, well, maybe I can remain in this position, or maybe it's time for me to go. Right. But
Yeah.
when what
Absolutely.
when we're in the middle of because you talked about flames, Dr. Ashley, I'm going to go back to fires. Because, but we're in the middle of the fire, it can be challenging to even figure out what direction to go, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Because of, all that's in front of us. And I love the fact that you've come in with allowing us to really think about how we can kind of literally shift gears, giving us that time to reevaluate is
Yeah.
such a gift. I am so curious because one of the things I love to hear about is when I talk to really incredible transformative experts like yourself who have really done incredible work as relates to not only just transforming our lives, but just empowering us with so much great information and resources. I always love to hear about the why. So what
Mhm.
made you decide to take on this really transformative platform, and why was it so important for you in terms of making sure that literally have the pulse in regards to our workplace?
Yeah. And so it goes back to, I spent over a decade as a psychotherapist. So I've always been in the healing profession. And so this is right along lines with that. And so it just kind of shifts a little bit from working one to one with working one to many, where if we can work to heal organizations as a whole, the impact that that's going to have is going to be even greater because we're going to have not only the employees that's going to be impacted by that, but also the consumers of the organization because they can feel when, like you can feel when an organization as a consumer, when they have good employees, when they have good leadership. That's why we are in line at Chick-fil-A, right? Because we know those employees are so happy, which is indicative of the culture of their organization. And so it touches so many different individuals when we really prioritize well workspaces and well organizations.
I love that. And you're right. In terms of levels of Chick-fil-A, they often say my pleasure, right? And
Absolutely.
and and they are when you're speaking to a Chick-fil-A employee, one of the things that they value is the consistency of making sure that the customer feels seen. right? And so it's not simply, hey, I can I have your order, please? It's really with a level of quality as it relates to service. And so I love that in terms of you sharing it, because I also think that's important, because I often share this with my students. I will say this, that I actually prefer to support businesses that I know, or at least that I have a feeling that I feel that the employees are being treated well, right? And so I really value, I feel like my money, my dollar, right, goes much further, because it says so much about the value of making sure that as a global community, that we're kind of supporting the efforts of individuals, because we're not in this alone, right? We're literally in this together. So I love that you share the those dynamics. So I know you have a lot of transformative stories. And so I would love for you to share a transformative success story from your community as it relates to your work. And also, when you share, I'd love for you to talk about how that has made you feel in terms
Yeah.
of being able to provide these resources.
Yeah, a lot of our transformation happens because we work with organizations of all sizes, but a lot of our transformation happens whenever organizations are able to retain good talent, right? Because if they're retaining good talent, then that means that you're not having someone walking out of the door, and that means that you've done something right to keep them there. And if you've done something right to keep them there, then you're doing something right to keep other people there, right? And so once we incorporate the P.U.L.S.E framework, you have employees that are happier, and you also have leaders who feel like that they are equipped with a tool. What a lot of things that we see is a lot of leaders are being promoted to um, leadership positions because they do a good job, and not necessarily because they have the tools to be a good leader. And so once they're able to learn the framework and implement the framework, now they have something in their tool belt to give them the confidence to walk in this leadership role and be more effective across the entire organization. And so that is where the transformation really happens, is when people learn the framework and they implement it.
I love that, because you're so right in terms of the fact that um, you have some managers that have done a great job, maybe in whatever capacity that was, now have been promoted to now a management status, I should say. Maybe they were working in a non-management status, and now they're working as a manager, and now they're managing a team. And saying that, in terms of managing the team, doesn't mean you may have the skills as it relates to understanding the value of management skills, right? Or in terms of how to manage a team, or what that looks like in terms of managing the team. So you're absolutely, I love that you're talking about the value of having more tools, right, to be able to share and really, to empower. It's interesting because we're living in a time during the pandemic where we're hearing about what is called the great resignation, of people
Mhm.
resigning from so many different positions and so forth.
Yeah.
What do you think what do you think a manager who's listening now, how do you think they should receive that information in terms of really, really reevaluating their workplace and looking at what's going on in terms of the great resignation, so they don't find that they are now embarking on their own great resignation at work?
Yeah, yeah. And I think it goes back to the heart of this entire conversation. It deals with workplace well being. Individuals, especially millennial and Gen Zers, are really prioritizing their well being. And so that is why what we're seeing with the great resignation, we have seen millennials and Gen Zers say, if it doesn't serve me, I am cutting it off. And that has to do with parents, that has to do with friends, jobs, anything that doesn't serve my wellness has no place. And so if we begin to really focus on workplace well-being and making sure that we take care of people, then those same people are going to take care of us.
I love that. Those same people will take care of us and thinking about the value and understanding the importance of taking care of people. This is the part of the podcast. I always say this. It's beginning to be my thing at this point because this is the part where I have to start wrapping up the conversation. And I say that because one of the things that I love so much is having this conversation with you in regards to the importance of work. And for those who may be listening, who may be really weighing, how do I go about, getting my happy back on a job, or a manager that is thinking about how to go about creating much more of leading with the heart and leading with empathetic approaches and taking on levels of the P.U.L.S.E approach, right? I want them to know where to find you. So where can our audience find you?
So the name of our consulting organization is called Delani, and that's DELLANNI. And you can find me at delani.com.
Excellent. And do you are you like me and love all things social media? Although I will tell you that I am more present in other locations than I am in others. Like I love Twitter, but I live on Instagram and LinkedIn and Facebook. So where do you live online so we can also find you there?
Yeah, you can most likely find me online through LinkedIn or Facebook. And Facebook is just at Dr. Ashley.
Excellent. And for those of you who are listening, we're going to have all of Dr. Ashley's information on her podcast page that will represent where to find her, also as it relates to her website, and really all of the true brilliance that she has really brought as it relates to the P.U.L.S.E approach. So I asked this question for everyone who's on the podcast, Dr. Ashley, and that is because it's about well-being, and that is because the Courting Happiness podcast is all about making sure that we're committing right to our happiness and our well-being journey. What do you do to commit to your happiness journey?
Oh, that's such a good question, Dr. Courtney.
Because
Okay,
you're the
so
woman
this
helping us all, right? Right?
yes. So this is going to sound really cheesy. I'm going to go ahead and throw that out there
Go for
because
it.
because get so caught up in being an entrepreneur, being a wife, wearing all of these hats that literally I have carved out throughout the day time where I sit in nothingness and look outside of my window and do a grounding exercise. And so every day you may walk past my office at home and you may see me sitting in my office looking out the window and doing nothing, but I'm really doing a grounding exercise that's really simple, where I take notice of what's 5 things I see, 4 things I hear, 3 things I smell, 2 things I feel, and then I will put a piece of candy or a piece of gum in my mouth and take notice of like the flavors that I taste, and where I engage all 5 senses to help just get me grounded. Just take a couple minutes to recenter me and get me grounded.
I love that. I love that so much because it is so mindful and
Mm-hmm.
it really allows you to be present. I'm going to work on that exercise for myself. I love the fact that you are talking about the level in terms of grounding yourself, but I love that you shared that. I'm going to actually include that now in my well-being approach. And
Yes.
you might actually hear me share what your approach is in a couple of speaking engagements, because I really treasure what you just shared in terms of looking at this and really, really opening yourself to your senses, but also the value of being mindful and present along the way. It's really brilliant. I'm so grateful that you shared that with us.
Yeah. I'd love for you to try it and tell me how it works for you.
I will, I promise you. One thing about me, I
Yes.
love giving credit. And I love talking and I love sharing. So I'm looking forward to sharing that and more with you. Dr. Ashley, thank you so much for sharing your time, your brilliance, and also your transformative approach of really helping to empower more organizations live well at work. Thank you so much for being here today. Let's continue this conversation online. Email us at podcast@drcourtneyalston.com. That's podcast at drkortnialston.com. Join us on Instagram at Courting Happiness. Don't forget, that's courting with a K. Also, I hope you join our private Facebook community. You can find us at Courting Happiness Podcast Community. Our private Facebook group is a safe haven to share, meet more people looking to build positive relationships, focus on well-being, and create a happier life. Now, are you ready to spread happiness? We hope you subscribe and share this podcast with your family, friends, coworkers, and all the important people in your world. We release a new episode every Thursday. Congratulations on your continued commitment to your courting happiness journey. Thank you so much for listening. We want you to be well, be happier, and be kinder to yourself. We can't wait to see you next week.